Well, we finished our first month at school. I hope it was a productive one. And I hope by the end of the month, many of your schools were more harmonious than they were at the beginning. I say that because at the beginning of September, I had some calls from schools concerned about conflict within their school community. You don't have to guess what that conflict was about because I think we've all experienced it. It was around masks, vaccinations, vaccination cards. People have really strong opinions about these things. And as a result, it has led to a fair degree of conflict. Many of us have chosen not to talk about them at all because we're tired of the argument. Why are we experiencing the level of conflict that we are today? Why does it appear that we are more fragile, that our relationships with each other, the relationships between families and students, is more volatile than it's ever been? Well, I want to suggest one thing, and that one thing is, if solved, a way to reduce conflict, increase resilience, and bind people together in communities that are strong and supportive and able to weather the storms of disagreement. This observation comes from a conversation I had with my daughter this summer. We were talking about some families that we knew, and we were talking about those that seemed to be doing very well, where there were strong and loving relationships between members of the family, and another family in particular that seemed to be struggling in that area. And as we were trying to figure out why one family was flourishing and the other wasn't, there was only one thing that seemed obvious to us, because in many ways there were similarities between both families. You know what the obvious thing was? One of those families had what I came to call a confessional culture. Now, what do I mean by that? What's a confessional culture? Well, we know confession to be the act of admitting one's sins, admitting one's failures, but it's more than that. It's also the act of anticipating, when you confess, forgiveness, reconciliation. A confessional culture only exists in a place where it's safe to confess. Where it isn't safe to confess, where acknowledging fault is going to be used against you, or where you are forced to confess so you can be shamed and mocked and dehumanized, there is no confession. There's just incredible defensiveness, incredible entrenchment of attitudes, particularly negative attitudes toward others who have threatened you and who have accused you. There's hiding. There's a lack of transparency. There's a lack of deep, authentic relationships. And confessional cultures are characteristic of healthy Christian communities. And here's what I think, and I could be wrong, but I think that in the past, when there was more of a Christian influence in Western culture and Canadian culture, there was also more present confessional culture in a lot of places. There was an understanding that we are to extend mercy to people, that we are to forgive people. There was a desire to see people redeemed, to see people come back from awful failures or awful falls and to redeem themselves in some way. In fact, that was part of the language that we often used. We liked redemption stories. But it seems to me that something shifted and changed very dramatically in a fairly short period of time, where now we've become not a confessional culture, but a confrontational culture. A culture ready to confront others because they have different political views, or they have the wrong ideas about health standards, or we could just go on and on and on. And in this confrontational culture, we are so quick to judge others and to condemn others, to cancel others, as some say. And unfortunately, we know that our children are struggling in that reality. And so when I was listening to these phone calls, when I was hearing about this conflict between parents, and I was being asked to give some advice as to how to minimize the conflict, my suggestion was all around how we can cultivate this confessional culture. And in order to do that, there are some things that we have to do very deliberately. Can I tell you what one of them is? We have to stop acting like we know the future. We have to be humble toward the future. You see, one of the reasons that people are so quick to hold an opinion these days and hold it without ever considering a change of opinion is that they somehow have fallen into a pattern of believing that they know the future. That if you do this, it will lead to that. If you do that, it will lead to this. But that certainty is misplaced. It's prideful. It's wrong. We don't know the future. We don't know the outcome. So our posture toward the future should always be a humble one. Yes, we know Jesus is coming back, but that's about it. Between now and then, we don't know what's going to happen. So let's be humble. Let's not cut other people off. Let's listen to what they have to say. And if they're saying things we disagree with, let's give reason for disagreeing with them. Let's not just disagree with them because we listen to a different voice that we trust more than the voice they listen to. Let's actually give reason. Let's teach our kids to do that. Let's model it. You see, my concern is that our kids aren't going to learn this until they see it. And so that means that when we're working with parents, when we're working with staff members, when we're working among ourselves, we really need to model this humble posture toward one another where we actually listen deeply, where we don't just jump in and judge, where we don't dehumanize someone because they disagree with us, where we open ourselves to the possibility that we could be wrong too. And then in that context where we try to find common ground, not places that we disagree, maybe we'll build stronger relationships with one another. You see, in the end, we are to model what Jesus told us to among ourselves, which is to love him first and foremost with every part of ourselves, and then to love each other, to treat each other the way we want to be treated, to love our enemies. These are really fundamental ideas that we all understand and we've all heard before, but so hard to practice. And I just want to encourage you this year, because there will be ongoing conflict. Your parents have been tuned to confront, not to confess. Your kids have been tuned to confront, not to confess. So maybe we, the leaders of these Christian schools that God has entrusted us with, can learn to be confessional, can create safe spaces where people can express opinion and they're not immediately going to be dehumanized or judged because of the opinion that they hold. And when we're wrong, we'll admit it. When other people are wrong, we'll make it safe for them to admit it. We'll actually work our way toward each other, not push ourselves away from each other. We'll realize that we really don't know what we think we know as well as we think we know it. We all are learning. We all are growing. We need each other to help us understand what's really going on. And then maybe if the kids see it in us, they're going to duplicate it in their own lives. So let me just encourage you. Ask God to help cultivate in your school community a confessional culture this year. And maybe, just maybe, by the end of the year, you'll be enjoying more harmony and more resilience in relationship in your community than you've experienced at the beginning of this year. Have a good month.